Good morning. My name is Sejal Soni, and I'll be presenting on the Great Lakes Ecological and Economic Protection Act of 2015. I'd like to thank my task group members, Rebecca Snyder and Lauren Wallahan, our faculty advisor, Dr. Palmer, and the rest of my fantastic team. The Great Lakes region is the largest freshwater system on Earth. It is home to 5 of the world's largest lakes and 8 major cities. 34 million Americans live in this region, and 24 million of them rely on the Great Lakes for their drinking water. Tourism, fishing, farming, and other industries based on natural resources in the region brought in 1.5 million jobs to the American people and $62 billion in wages in 2009 alone. But because people and industries use these environmental services so much, many parts of the Great Lakes have been polluted by industries like mining and left unable to combat the effects of excessive nutrient runoff and invasive species like water milfoil. This leads to an economic decline and a loss of cultural resources. One such area under threat is the St. Louis River, which is one of America's most polluted rivers. This river faces recent and historic pollution from industrial plants, wastewater, and urban development. There's even a Superfund site in this area. The wetlands here were once plentiful with fish and native plants, including wild rice, a staple food that's also intrinsic to traditions of Chippewa communities. Harvesting, process, and eating the rice are communal traditions that help keep other aspects of the tribe's culture alive, like their language. Restoration efforts are underway to increase wild rice harvest in the region once more. The Fond du Lac Band of the Chippewa tribe is a key stakeholder and coordination partner in these efforts. The Fond du Lac Band is one of 6 Chippewa Indian bands in Minnesota. They have over 4,000 members, and their resource management division works to increase wild rice harvests by removing dams and removing invasive species, as seen in this photo. In the last 5 years, 150 acres of wild rice have been restored. The Fond du Lac Band is able to use these harvests to maintain traditional practices and teach the next generation of Chippewa members about their rich culture in this land. The Chippewa tribe holds the rice as a sacred gift from their creator, as it is the reason the band settled in this area centuries ago. This is one of many examples of ecological restoration making meaningful impacts to communities in the region. For the most effective restoration work to occur, the many moving parts in this system require a smooth and transparent federal administration. The act we're discussing today centralizes efforts to reduce environmental problems in the Great Lakes region by formally establishing key components of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, phase 1 of which was implemented in 2010 and spanned through 2015. It made more progress in the first 5 years than had been made during the preceding 25 years of federal cleanup efforts. The Act reauthorizes the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative for another 5 years to continue work in 5 focus areas. These are cleaning up contaminated areas, combating invasive species, reducing nutrient runoff, restoring habitats to protect native species, and tracking progress and work with strategic partners. The Act has 4 major components to address long-term goals. First, it funds phase 2 of the Restoration Initiative through the year 2020 with an annual budget of $475 million. These funds are distributed through federal, state, municipal, and tribal agencies and nonprofit and academic partners for on-the-ground restoration projects. Next, the Act permanently establishes the Great Lakes Interagency Task Force, a collaboration of 11 federal agencies led by the EPA, which is the agency that oversees the Great Lakes National Program Office. The task force develops the 5-year action plan for ecological restoration and oversees project selection and funding allocation. Next, the Act formally establishes the Great Lakes Advisory Board, a committee of non-federal stakeholders appointed by the EPA that provides non-binding recommendations to the task force. Current members include the Council of Great Lakes Industries, the Detroit branch of the NAACP, and the Great Lakes Maritime Research Institute. Lastly, the Act requires an annual Crosscut budget report that shows federal spending for all agencies in the past fiscal year, as well as comprehensive restoration reports to Congress to ensure accountability and progress. These reports are crucial to continued success, and our implementation plan for phase 2 addresses concerns raised during phase 1 about inadequate reporting and accountability. This map shows some of the projects that were funded under phase 1. There were over 2,000, and many more will be funded during phase 2. Each project under the initiative will have a separate staffing plan, budget, and calendar, so rather than focusing on individual projects, our federal implementation plan focuses on the higher administration levels of Phase 2. This includes the operations of the Interagency Task Force, the Advisory Board, and the Great Lakes National Program Office, which guides recommendations from those two groups into tangible outcomes. The National Program Office is part of the EPA and coordinates all scientific work in the region. Because the office is responsible for so much, we recommend an expansion of their staffing plan. We recommend hiring an officer of application review to ensure all focus areas are being addressed. We also suggest hiring an officer of budget allocation and a financial management team to ensure that the annual budget is distributed appropriately. A team of 5 administrative assistants will support daily activities of the task force, the advisory board, and others. Because these officers would work from the existing National Program Office, we do not have to account for the cost and time of setting up a new office space with supplies. In addition to these positions, we recommend hiring an officer of Crosscut budget reporting to address a one-time administrative need that I will discuss shortly. The advisory board members who make recommendations to the task force are appointed representatives from state and tribal governments, nonprofits, and other groups. The advisory board members are leaders in the region that drive policy to better people's lives and livelihoods. We recommend rotating membership of this board with 1/3 of the representatives coming up for replacement each year. Tribal representatives, like those from the Fond du Lac Band, and representatives from other minority groups can advocate for their members' interests by making recommendations to the task force. The advisory board's main goals are to represent the diverse range of interests in the region and to increase public engagement by making meetings open to the public and, as we suggest, broadcasting meetings online. The Act mandates that the EPA administrator produce a yearly comprehensive restoration report to Congress detailing restoration efforts and funding amounts to each task force agency, as well as highlighting project accomplishments and documenting all stakeholder recommendations. Updates on scientific measures of progress, such as levels of contaminants in fish, are also included in this report. Non-scientific performance metrics for reporting are the timely and complete submission of the comprehensive restoration report. The Act mandates that the EPA submit these reports to Congress no later than 90 days after the end of each fiscal year. Increasing transparency and accountability at the higher levels of administration is an important goal of the Act, and mandatory reports like this are checkpoints in the ongoing process of increasing transparency. Along with the comprehensive restoration reports, an annual Crosscut budget report must be submitted to Congress. This report must detail all federal funds spent anywhere in the Great Lakes region, including non-restoration initiative projects, such as water infrastructure, that might be covered under something like Superfund cleanup activities. The annual budget calls for significant expenditures of public funds, and these expenses need to be accounted for and linked to real benefits. As part of the Act, a retrospective Crosscut budget dating back to 2004 must be created to document the recent history of federal spending. The Federal Office of Management and Budget reports that it is understaffed and lacks the resources necessary to compile these past data. So as part of the Phase 2 implementation, we recommend a one-time funding allocation to secure these data. We recommend creating a new contract position, the Officer of Crosscut Budget Reporting that I mentioned earlier, to work on the retrospective report. This position's contract will be renewed each year as needed until this retrospective report is complete. Here we have the National Program Office budget for Phase 1 years, as well as the first year of Phase 2, 2016. And this year, the operating budget for the National Program Office has been increased by 7% over the 2014 operating budget because of new staffing positions and travel reimbursement for the advisory board. As you can see here, the budget allocation of Phase 2 will be much larger than Phase 1 years, so the proportion of the total initiative funding going towards these overarching administrative costs remains quite small. The overarching administration provides critical support and guidance of restoration projects, but does not require a large part of the total annual budget. The Great Lakes Ecological and Economic Protection Act of 2015 is a unified effort to address environmental problems in the Great Lakes region. It does so by permanently establishing both the Interagency Task Force and the Advisory Board to encourage participation from the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. It also mandates restoration reports and cross-cut budget reports to Congress to ensure accountability and transparency in the high-level administration. There is still much work to be done in the region, and formally establishing these entities and relationships is the first step to many years of successful environmental restoration. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Great presentation, Sej. Do you have any examples of what types of issues the NAACP would be addressing in regards to this bill?
I don't have any specific examples, but the NAACP might be able to advocate for cleanup in certain areas that might affect marginalized populations disproportionately. Also, ecological restoration that could benefit the communities by creating parks or other recreational areas that they could use.
Thanks, Sej. So I guess I have a quick question on the native species. If you could just give an example of a few native species that the Act specifically targets and seeks to improve the population of, that'd be great.
Sure, there are several species of plants and fish that the Act is aiming to increase the populations of. Fisheries were once a main part of the industry in the Great Lakes, and they hope to make that a large economic part of the area once more. So by increasing these populations of certain fish, they can create more jobs and economic prosperity, not just for fishing through tourism, but fishing for food as well.
One more.
Hey, Sej. With respect to minority representation on your advisory board, do you plan on having advocates for minorities as a whole or advocates for specific minority groups?
The advocates are for specific minority groups. The advisory board is represented by 18 to 20 members, and they are representatives from specific groups. They often can collaborate to have representatives from two groups be represented by one representative on the board, but they are specific, and that's why we are encouraging rotating membership so that more groups can be represented through the advisory board.